Aloha, this is Brad Bordessa from liveukulele.com. Welcome to part 2 of my music theory series. I'm going to talk about how to build a major scale and probably minor scales out of a chromatic scale. So in the last video we talked about the 12-note chromatic scale being kind of the basis of all Western music, and it's just the 12 notes that we get when you're playing Western music. So out of these you can take a certain formula, and if you use that formula to pick either a whole step or a half step, you pick different amounts of whole steps and half steps as you go through, then you can make the major scale. So a whole step is 2 notes up, 2 steps up, and that's equal to 2 frets. So if you were to go from, say, an open A string on the ukulele to the 2nd fret, a B note, that's a whole step. A half step is when you go just a half step, and that would be 1 fret. So that would be an open A string to a 1st fret B flat. So the formula for finding out major scales, I don't know if I have room left, but I'll write it in the middle, is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 and then one last half. So you can think of it, my music teacher kind of taught it to us like this, where you have whole, whole, half, bridged by one more whole in the middle. But I just learned it as it is. So you have 2 wholes and a half, 3 wholes and a half. So with this information, we can start making major scales right out of the chromatic scale. So all you do is you just pick a note to start on, and that would be your root. So for instance, let's try C. And my chromatic scale, just for the record, goes and wraps down, and then from here it would start over again at A, or here it would start over again and go down. So let's try C just for kicks, because C is the easiest scale to do demonstrations and stuff in. And let's try it. So we need a whole step first from our starting note, so we go up a whole step from C to D. Then we need another whole step, so we're going to go D, half step, whole step, up to E. And now we have the first half step, and so we only go up 1 note from E to F. Then another whole, so from F to G, whole, G, wrapping up to A. And then we have another whole up to B, and then the final half that wraps it up and gives us the kind of leading tone resolution note back up to C. So all the blue notes, all the normal natural notes is in a C scale, and you might have known that already, but this is why that is. This is why you only use these notes. Let's try a different root. So when you change the root, you change the scale name and the scale notes. So instead of being C major, it's going to be the name, whatever the other name is going to be. So for the next example, let's make an A major scale, just because that's the first note. We'll be able to go all the way through without having to jump around anywhere. So same formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And starting from an A note, we have a whole step to B. Except my pen just died. Whole step to B, a whole step to a C sharp. So that's where these sharps and stuff start to come in, is when your wholes and your half steps are jumping all the natural notes, so you are going to end up with sharps and flats. And then a half step from C sharp to D, and then a whole step from D to E, whole step to F sharp, a whole step to G sharp, and then our last half step just up to the A. So that's how you're going to figure out just a simple major scale. You can do that from any of these notes. You could start on any of them and use the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half system and find any major scale. You can do the same thing on the ukulele, and it's easier to visualize because you can go just along one straight line. So let's try the A major scale. So we'll just start on the open bottom string, and you go whole step, so you're going up 2 half steps or 2 frets, so up to the B, whole step up to C sharp, half step up to D, a whole step to E, a whole step to F sharp, a whole step to G sharp, and then the half step back to A. So that's the pattern. It's the same on a string as it is on a piece of paper or on a board. So we have these different note distances. I could play the same kind of note distance shape on the next string up, and it would be the same thing. It's just we're changing the starting note. So I had open, 2nd fret, 4th fret, 5th fret, 7, 9, 11, and 12. You could use those same fret numbers on a different string, and you'd be playing the scale that the string is named after. So we could play an E major scale using those same frets, same note distances, except now it's an E major because we're playing it on the E string. Same thing for the other strings. So in music there is this term called the relative minor, and it's just the minor chord that is the most closely associated to the major chord in a certain key. And that relative minor is always the 6th note of a major scale. Okay, so in C, if you were to count up a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, your 6th note is an A. So an A minor is the relative in the key of C. So C major, A minor are relative major, relative minor chords. So they're related to each other, kind of like that. In G, for example, it would be E minor. So as you can hear, there's not a lot of movement going on. That's because there's only one note that changes between a major and the relative minor. In the key of A. So you can play, you know, there are all kinds of familiar songs that have this kind of chord in it. There's the relative minor. C, A minor, F, G7. So, the relative minor, cool thing, it doesn't really, knowing what it's called doesn't really help you in most situations. But what we're going to do now is take this whole half setup, and we're going to start it from what would be the 6th note, and you're going to be able to get a minor scale using the same concept. Okay, so I've written out what the relative minor distances are with the whole and half step system. And what we get is something like this. So it's the same amount of whole steps, same amount of half steps, and they're actually in the same order, you're just starting it from the 6th. So this is where you normally start from. If we were doing a major key, this is where we start from. So it would be whole, half, whole, half. But since we started from the 6th note, which is the relative minor, we started here on the 6th. So now it's whole, half, half, whole. So same concept, we're just using the whole half steps in different places. So let's try A minor just for kicks, that's an easy one. So we use this setup of whole and half steps, and we start it on the A because that's our root note. So we have a whole step from A up to B, there's a half step from B to C, a whole step from C to D, a whole step from D to E, a half step from E to F, and then a whole step to G, and a whole step back to A. So that's probably the most common minor scale too. You might be familiar with that already, but this is how you make it. This is why it is. So let's start again on the bottom A string just for kicks, and I'll demonstrate it there. So, open A, up a whole step, 2 frets to the B, a half step to C, whole step to D, whole step to E, a half step to F, whole step to G, and then a whole step to A. So, starting on the same string as we used to make that major scale, but because we're starting from a different spot, from the 6th note, it is a minor sound. So, really minor, a lot different than this. Or whatever. You can start making stuff up with the scales and put them in different orders. That's all I was doing there. So just for kicks, let's try making a minor from a different root note. Let's do D minor. D minor is another really good minor key. And so now we start on D, use the same setup. So whole step from D up to E, a half step from E to F, a whole step from F to G, a whole step from G to A, and then a half step from A to B flat, and then a whole step to C, and a whole step back to our starting note, which is D. So D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, and D. So same distances between the notes, but you started from a different one and you get a totally new scale. So that's how you build major and minor scales off of chromatic scale. So just like you have 12 notes on the fretboard before they repeat, you can use the open strings to kind of play around with the concept and figure out your different scales if you like. And you can also start either of these, either the minor whole half or the major whole half, from any note, any fretted note. So you could we could do like a D major, for instance. So it'd be D whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So there's that major sound again, but we started it on a fretted note. So you can do that anywhere, and you can move up and down strings if you like. If you want to start on the D here, you can move it around and play across a couple of different strings, however you want to do it. So see you in the next video. Gonna cover triads and making chords.